It was late, and I was sitting in the living room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when something strange caught my eye. My wife, Erica, had been acting distant for weeks. But tonight, something felt different. As I looked through the messages on her phone, curiosity gnawing at me, I found it. A conversation between Erica and some guy I didn't know, discussing meeting up. The messages were full of flirtation, all wrapped up in coded language that would make anyone suspicious. The name Chris kept popping up. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a friend, maybe a colleague. But when I scrolled further, I found something that stopped my heart cold. A picture of Erica, dressed provocatively, smiling next to someone who definitely wasn't me. It was an intimate photo, her arms wrapped around his neck, their faces too close for comfort. The gut-wrenching realization hit me like a freight train. My wife was cheating on me. I'd always thought that our open marriage meant trust, understanding, freedom, but what I hadn't realized was how deep her betrayal went. The thought of Erica with another man, touching her, sharing things with her that should have been mine, made my stomach churn. My hands trembled as I looked at the message again. This was the moment I would never forget. This was how I found out. The worst part? She had lied to my face so many times. Each time she would come home late, she'd tell me she was at work or out with friends. How many times had I believed her? How many times had I excused her behavior, trusting that she knew what was best for our relationship? Now, I couldn't stop the flood of anger, disbelief, and pain that overwhelmed me. I threw the phone down on the couch and leaned back, trying to take it all in. How could she do this to me? The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted above anyone else, was living a double life. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the constant lies, the gaslighting, the manipulation. Erica had always been charming, the life of the party. But behind that smile, she'd been playing me, using our marriage as a shield while hiding her secrets. The next morning felt like a bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind when I discovered Erica's betrayal. The hurt was sharp, raw, and suffocating, but I couldn't let it sit there. I had to confront her. I had to hear her explanation, even if I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the lies she'd surely spin. Erica was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, the sound of her phone ringing softly beside her. She didn't even look up at me, too busy texting or scrolling. She was always like that in the mornings, distracted, busy, too absorbed in whatever her plans for the day were. But today, the distance between us felt like an abyss. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, but when I spoke, my voice came out colder than I expected. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her expression neutral, too neutral. If she was shocked, she didn't show it. About what? She was already back to her phone, typing away as if she hadn't just crushed me the night before. I couldn't keep it in anymore. About Chris, and the pictures, and everything. The words felt heavy as they left my mouth, each one a hammer driving the truth home. Her eyes flickered up, and I saw the panic in them, only for a second before she masked it with a fake, forced smile. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to feign innocence. It was almost laughable how poorly she could hide it. "You think I didn't see the messages? The picture?" I continued, feeling my anger build. "I know what's going on, Erica. You're cheating on me. I saw it all. Don't lie to me." For a long moment, she didn't speak. I could see her scrambling for a response, the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with something convincing. Finally, she put the phone down, crossed her arms, and sighed dramatically. "Oh my God, really? You're going to bring this up now? That's not what you think. It's not what it looks like. Then what is it, Erica?" I demanded. "What exactly is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're sleeping with some guy behind my back." Her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape, but she kept her voice calm, too calm. "I told you, we have an open marriage. This is nothing. I thought you were fine with this. It's not like we haven't discussed it before." The audacity. The way she said that, so dismissively, made my blood boil. Did she really think I would just accept her betrayal as part of some agreement? Did she honestly think I would sit here and pretend that this was just a casual thing? We had talked about an open marriage, sure, but this wasn't what I signed up for. There was no trust, no honesty anymore. "No, Erica, this is not an open marriage. This is you running around behind my back, lying and betraying me in ways I didn't even think were possible. Don't act like this is nothing. You're sleeping with another man while I've been loyal to you, and you have the nerve to say this is fine." She sighed again, rolling her eyes like I was the one overreacting. "Oh my God, you're acting like I murdered someone. It's just some fun. You knew what you were getting into when we made those rules. Don't act like I'm the only one breaking them." The words hit me like a slap in the face. How could she be so cold, so completely indifferent to what she had done? I couldn't believe this was happening. How had the woman I loved turned into someone so callous, so completely removed from the reality of what she was doing? I didn't sign up for you sneaking around behind my back with someone I don't even know, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. I didn't sign up for you lying to me, for you pretending everything was fine while you're off with some guy. That's not part of the deal. She raised her hands in mock surrender. Okay, I get it. You're hurt. But come on, it's just a little fun. It doesn't mean anything. Why are you blowing this up so much? I still love you, but this is just something that makes me feel good. Why can't you just let it go? The audacity. The absolute nerve. She was sitting there, acting like it was nothing, like I was the one in the wrong for even feeling hurt, for even being upset. She was justifying everything, turning it around so that she didn't have to take responsibility for the pain she'd caused me. It was infuriating. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, I can't just let it go, Erica. You've destroyed everything. I don't know who you are anymore. Her face twisted into something ugly, impatience mixed with annoyance. Fine, whatever. If you're so upset, maybe we should just end it. But I'm not going to stop seeing him just because you don't like it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. You're unbelievable. I don't need to explain myself to you. I've given you everything I can. You're the one who can't keep up. I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. She didn't care. She didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. She didn't care that I was sitting there, broken and devastated. She just wanted to be free to do whatever she pleased. Consequences be damned. The days following our confrontation felt like I was walking through a fog. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Erica beyond the bare necessities. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the cold, indifferent woman who had so casually shattered everything we had. Every time she opened her mouth, it felt like another lie slipped out. Another piece of the trust we had built up over the years just shattered into dust. It wasn't the affair that hurt the most, as much as it was the way she acted about it afterward. The way she didn't seem to care. I found myself questioning everything. Was our entire marriage just a game to her? Did she ever care about me? Or was I just another thing she could manipulate, a placeholder in her life while she went off with whoever made her feel good in the moment? I spent hours just staring at the walls of our house, trying to figure out what went wrong, trying to find some way to make sense of all of this. I couldn't escape the image of her with Chris, laughing, touching him like she used to touch me, the way she used to look at me with love. How could that all just disappear? How could she do this to us? The anger was overwhelming, but it was tempered with an even deeper sense of hurt. There were so many things I could have said to her in the heat of the moment, so many things I wanted to scream, but all that came out was silence. She wasn't even trying to make things right. She wasn't even pretending to care about the damage she had caused. At night, it was worse. I couldn't sleep, couldn't escape the thoughts of betrayal that circled my mind like vultures. Every corner of the house felt like a reminder of the life we had built, the promises we had made to each other. I couldn't look at our bed without feeling sick, knowing she had shared it with someone else. And yet, she seemed so unaffected. She came home every night, acting as if everything was fine, as if she hadn't ripped my heart out. One night, as I lay in bed, wide awake and staring at the ceiling, I heard her whispering on the phone in the other room. Her voice was light, almost flirtatious, and it hit me like a slap. She was talking to him, the man who had taken everything from me. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. It was maddening. I wanted to storm in and yell at her, demand that she at least pretend to care, but I couldn't. I was too broken, too tired of fighting. It was like everything I had done to try and hold our marriage together was just a joke to her. I wasn't enough for her. I wasn't enough to keep her loyal, to keep her from seeking validation from some other man. And I hated myself for it. I tried talking to friends, seeking advice, but nothing seemed to help. Everyone told me the same thing. You deserve better than this. But that didn't make it any easier to let go. I couldn't just pretend it didn't hurt, couldn't just walk away from everything we had. The idea of losing Erica, it felt like losing a part of myself. But the longer I lived with this pain, the more I realized something important. I was losing myself. Every day that I stayed, every day I let her treat me like this, I was giving away pieces of who I was. I was letting her turn me into someone I didn't recognize. The man I had been, the man who had believed in our love and our promises, was slipping away. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. The emotional roller coaster was relentless. One moment I was filled with rage, ready to demand answers, to confront her one more time, to scream until I had nothing left. The next, I was paralyzed with sadness, unsure if I even wanted to fight anymore. What was the point? Was there anything left to save? I tried to talk to her, tried to understand her point of view. Maybe she felt something I didn't see. Maybe I had missed something along the way. But every time I brought it up, every time I asked her why, she just shut me down. "You're overreacting. You just need to relax," she would say, dismissing my pain as if it was nothing. It was like she didn't even care to try and salvage anything. Her responses were like daggers to my heart, and each one made it clearer and clearer that she had already moved on, even if I hadn't. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was just done with me. That realization, more than anything else, hit me the hardest. Erica was gone. The woman I had known and loved, she wasn't the same person anymore. She was someone else. Someone who didn't care, who didn't want to make things right, who didn't want to try. I sat in the living room one evening, feeling completely drained. My mind was a war zone, my emotions all over the place. I couldn't stand the thought of being in this relationship anymore, but I couldn't imagine walking away from it either. I loved her, despite everything. I loved her with a depth I couldn't even put into words. But what did that love mean if she didn't love me back? The more I tried to rationalize the situation, the more it felt like my mind was spinning in circles. Erica's behavior had drained every ounce of energy I had left. I was waking up every day, going through the motions, but I wasn't really living. I had become numb, lost in a fog of pain, frustration, and confusion. The man I was before, the one who had been confident, driven, and optimistic, seemed like a distant memory now. I started spending a lot of time on my own. I couldn't stand being around Erica anymore. Every time I looked at her, I saw the lies, the disloyalty. She had become a stranger to me. We would pass each other in the hall, barely exchanging a word. The silence between us was deafening. I knew I had to make a decision, but the fear of losing everything kept me trapped. My friends, the few who still stuck around, told me that I needed to get out, that I deserved better. But it wasn't that simple. Divorce wasn't just a word. It was a rupture of everything I had built over the years. There were memories, there were good times that made me question if it was all worth throwing away. But in my heart, I knew that the foundation of our marriage had been cracked beyond repair. I had tried, I had done everything I could to make it work, but Erica wasn't the same woman anymore. She had betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, and I was still too caught up in the emotional aftermath to figure out what to do next. One night, after yet another cold exchange at dinner, I found myself sitting on the couch staring at the TV with no interest. Erica had been glued to her phone, scrolling and laughing at something. I couldn't help but feel the bitterness rising within me. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was so absorbed in her world, with Chris and whatever else was going on, while I sat there, a shell of the man I used to be. I felt like I had reached the end of the line, like I had nowhere left to go. I couldn't stand the person I was becoming, constantly anxious, always looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next lie would come, wondering if I was about to be hit with another gut punch. It wasn't living, it was existing in a constant state of dread. I was losing myself, and I couldn't let that continue. I had to do something, anything, to take control of my life again. I had to decide whether I wanted to keep fighting for a relationship that felt more like a battle every day, or whether I needed to let go and start rebuilding. It was strange, but in a way, the decision came to me almost instinctively. I realized that I had been holding on to the hope that Erica might change, that things could go back to the way they were. But that hope was a lie. She wasn't going to change, and even if she did, I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. The reality of what she had done hit me harder than anything. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I had spent too long convincing myself that I could live with her lies, with her betrayal. But every day I let that go on, I was letting her tear me apart from the inside out. I wasn't the same person anymore. And I didn't want to be that person. I wanted to take my life back. I wanted to stop living in this toxic relationship, to stop waiting for something to magically change, to stop waiting for someone who didn't care enough to fight for us. So, I made the decision. I was going to file for divorce. The thought was terrifying. It felt like a death sentence to everything I had known. But at the same time, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The uncertainty, the constant emotional turmoil, it was finally going to end. I didn't want to be married to someone who treated me with such disrespect, someone who didn't value the years we had spent together, someone who didn't think twice about betraying me. I started making plans, reaching out to a lawyer, organizing the logistics of separating. It felt surreal, like I was making decisions for someone else, Someone whose life had fallen apart in ways that seemed too unbelievable to be real. But it was real. My life had unraveled, and now I had to pick up the pieces. When I told Erica about my decision, she didn't take it well. She had expected me to just accept everything, to keep going with the facade. She looked at me like I had just betrayed her, as if I was the one who had broken everything. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice rising in disbelief. "You're really going to throw everything away over this? You're overreacting." I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was bitter, angry. "You've already thrown everything away, Erica. You just don't care enough to see it." She stood there, silent, for a moment. Then she spoke in that same condescending tone she'd used throughout the affair. "I never wanted to hurt you. You knew what we were doing. You knew I needed this." I shook my head, the sadness overwhelming me. "No. What you needed was to lie, to use me, to break me down until I didn't recognize myself anymore. I don't need that in my life anymore." Her face twisted in a mix of anger and contempt. "You think this is easy for me? You think I haven't been dealing with my own stuff? You're the one who can't handle it." I didn't have the energy to argue with her anymore. I didn't owe her any more explanations. I had made my decision, and I was going to stick to it. This chapter of my life was over. It had to be. The first few weeks after I made the decision felt like an emotional war zone. I had left Erica, moved into a small apartment, and begun the arduous process of untangling my life from everything I had known. But the weight of the decision didn't hit me until I was alone, really alone, for the first time in what felt like years. At first, it was a relief, an overwhelming sense of freedom, as if I had just shed 100 pounds off my chest. I wasn't living in the shadow of Erica's lies anymore. I didn't have to wonder if she was seeing someone else, if she was still lying to me, or if she was just putting on an act. But that relief was fleeting, and the loneliness set in soon enough. I spent nights staring at the ceiling of my new apartment, the silence louder than I ever imagined it could be. There were no arguments, no cold exchanges, no manipulations, just an oppressive quiet that made me feel more isolated than ever. I hadn't realized how much I had depended on Erica, how much I had let her be my world, even while she was tearing it apart. As the days dragged on, I found myself thinking about the what-ifs. What if I had fought harder? What if I had confronted her sooner? Could I have salvaged something from the wreckage? But those questions were futile. The truth was, no amount of second-guessing would change what had already happened. Erica had chosen her path, and no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't follow her down that road. The legal side of things was a whirlwind. Erica was difficult, refusing to acknowledge the pain she had caused. She played the victim at every turn, even though she was the one who had been unfaithful. When we met with our lawyers, she insisted that everything was my fault, that I was the one who had failed to live up to the promises of our open marriage. The absurdity of it all made my blood boil. She was so far removed from reality that it was hard to have a real conversation with her. Every attempt to explain the depth of the betrayal seemed to fall on deaf ears. She was only concerned with her own narrative, her own needs, and her own justification for her actions. I had to remind myself that this was the same woman who had lied to my face, who had shattered my trust without a second thought. She wasn't going to change, no matter how many times I tried to reason with her. And as much as I wished it weren't true, I had to accept it. Erica wasn't the person I had married. She was someone I didn't recognize, someone whose actions were beyond any rational explanation. The first time I saw her after the divorce papers were filed, it felt surreal. She had changed so much, or maybe I had. She was still the same woman, but the weight of everything that had happened between us hung in the air like an unspoken truth. Her eyes, once full of warmth and affection, now seemed cold, calculating. It was clear that she had moved on in her own way, and I was nothing more than a footnote in her story. "You really think you're better off without me?" she asked, her voice laced with bitterness. "Do you think you can find someone else who will understand you like I did?" Her words were designed to hurt, to poke at the insecurities I had spent years building around her. But I had built a wall, a strong one. I was no longer the man who would beg for her love, no longer the man who would allow himself to be manipulated. "No," I replied, my voice steady, though the ache in my chest had not fully subsided. "But I think I deserve to find someone who won't betray me. Someone who won't lie to my face and tell me everything's fine while they're out doing God knows what behind my back." She seemed taken aback, her mouth opening and closing as if she had no idea how to respond. The woman who had once had so much power over me, who had twisted every situation to fit her narrative, was suddenly speechless. "You can't just erase what happened," I continued. "And you can't expect me to pretend like nothing's wrong. I can't keep lying to myself anymore. I won't." Her silence was the loudest thing in that moment. She looked like she wanted to say something, to fight back, but I could see in her eyes that she knew it was pointless. She had no ground to stand on anymore. I had seen the truth, and once that door had been opened, there was no closing it. Walking away from Erica was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most liberating. I was no longer chained to someone who didn't care about me. I was no longer living in fear of what I would find out next, or if another lie would surface. I had my life back, even if it was still bruised and broken from everything that had happened. I started to slowly rebuild myself. I started focusing on the things that made me happy again, the things I had neglected for far too long. I went to the gym, focused on my work, reconnected with old friends who had distanced themselves when Erica and I had become toxic. I started to reclaim the parts of me that had been lost in the haze of betrayal. But there were days when the loneliness still crept in, when I would catch myself remembering the good times, the moments when it felt like everything was right. Those moments made the pain all the more bitter. But I knew now that I had to let go of those memories. They weren't real anymore. What Erica had done, what she had chosen, was real, and I couldn't keep living in a fantasy world where things had turned out differently. The hardest part of all this was realizing that I wasn't just mourning the loss of Erica. I was mourning the loss of the person I had been with her. I had lost myself in our marriage, in trying to make it work when it was already broken. But now, I was starting to find myself again. As the weeks passed, I started to feel like I was clawing my way back to some semblance of normality. The pain, though still there, began to fade. I would wake up some mornings with the familiar ache in my chest, the reminder of the betrayal that had shaken me to my core, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been. The anger had dulled, and I was slowly beginning to find peace in the quiet moments. I wasn't rushing to forget or to get over it. I was taking things day by day, allowing myself to grieve, to heal in my own time. The first thing I did was focus on rediscovering myself. I remembered things about me that I had completely forgotten, things I used to love to do but had set aside while I tried to make things work with Erica. I started reading again, diving into books that had always sparked my imagination. I took up running, a passion I had long abandoned. There was something about the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement that allowed me to push out the lingering bitterness, to clear my mind of the ghosts of the past. But even as I filled my days with healthier habits and pursuits, there was still that dark shadow lurking in the background, the weight of everything that had happened. I had made the decision to leave Erica, but sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I'd find myself wondering what could have been. Was there any chance that our marriage could have been saved? Could we have worked through the pain and betrayal? Could I have trusted her again if she had begged for forgiveness? But then reality would hit, and I would remember the coldness in her eyes, the way she brushed off my feelings, the way she had treated me when I had finally confronted her. No, there was no going back. I had made the right decision, even though it was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. Still, that didn't mean I didn't struggle. The loneliness crept in, especially at night. I missed the companionship, the familiarity of having someone there to share the little things with, the mundane moments that made life feel whole. But I also realized something crucial. I had been so focused on holding on to Erica, on trying to save a marriage that was already doomed, that I had forgotten how to take care of myself, how to be whole on my own. I had allowed myself to be swallowed up by someone else's needs and desires, and now I had to figure out how to reclaim my own. I started spending more time with friends, reaching out to people I had neglected over the years. They were supportive, kind, and eager to help me rebuild the pieces of my life. It wasn't easy to admit that I needed help, that I had let myself become a shadow of who I once was, but I was starting to realize that there was no shame in healing, in leaning on others when necessary. The isolation that had felt so suffocating was beginning to lift. One evening, I met up with my friend Ben for drinks. He had been one of the few people I could confide in during the darkest days of my marriage. He was a listener, not someone to judge, and his presence made me feel like I wasn't alone in all this. "So, how are you holding up?" Ben asked, taking a sip of his beer. His eyes were filled with genuine concern. I let out a long sigh, running my fingers through my hair. "Honestly, it's been better. Some days are easier than others. I feel like I'm getting there. I'm figuring out who I am again, you know? But it's still tough." Ben nodded, understanding. "It's gonna take time, man. But you're doing the right thing. You got out. And you'll find yourself again. Hell, you're already starting to. I can see it." I appreciated his encouragement, even though I wasn't sure if I could fully believe it myself. It still felt so fresh, so raw. The idea of trusting someone else, let alone getting into another relationship, seemed impossible. Erica had torn apart something inside of me, and I wasn't sure if I could ever rebuild it. How could I let someone else in after everything she had done? I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone like I trusted her, I admitted, my voice quiet. Ben gave me a knowing look. And maybe you won't. But that doesn't mean you have to lock yourself away forever. Trust takes time. The right person will come along, and when they do, you'll be ready. I thought about his words long after we parted ways. I wasn't ready for another relationship, and maybe I never would be. But the idea that someday I could trust again, that someday I might find someone who would make me feel safe, respected, and loved, it was a glimmer of hope I hadn't allowed myself to consider until now. The next few months passed in a blur. There were still days when I woke up and felt the weight of everything, still nights when I would lie awake, replaying the betrayal in my mind. But as time went on, the intensity of that pain began to subside. It didn't disappear completely, it couldn't, but I began to accept that it was a part of my past, not the entirety of my future. I started to let go of the bitterness, the anger. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but I knew I had to do it for myself. Holding on to that pain would only keep me tied to a past that I could never change. And that was the hardest lesson to learn, that some things were just beyond my control. Erica's betrayal wasn't something I could undo, but how I chose to live after it was entirely up to me. I was becoming stronger, more resilient. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to believe that life could be good again, without her. The healing process was slow, but as the months went by, I started to see the pieces of my life fall back into place. I found myself rediscovering old passions and hobbies that I had neglected for far too long. It wasn't about replacing the pain with distractions, it was about rebuilding my sense of self. I had spent so much time trying to be everything for Erica, but now, I needed to be everything for me. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. People I'd lost touch with because I had become so consumed with my marriage and the drama that came with it. Ben, who had been my sounding board during the worst of it, was still a constant in my life. He was a good friend, always offering words of wisdom, always listening, never judging. We spent hours talking about everything, life, work, love, and the things that made us who we were. I could feel myself slowly coming back to life in these conversations, like I was finally starting to see who I was outside of the relationship I had been in. I spent weekends hiking, finding solace in the quiet of the trails. The rhythmic sound of my footsteps on the dirt, the crisp air, the solitude, it gave me the space I needed to reflect. I realized that Erica had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken everything. I still had my mind, my body, and the ability to rebuild. I could find happiness again, even if it didn't look like what I had imagined with her. And I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The idea of love seemed distant, like something I wasn't sure I could ever trust again. But I stopped feeling the need to rush it. I stopped looking for the perfect person to replace Erica because I realized there was no replacement. There was no person who would come in and magically fix everything. I had to fix myself first. I also started focusing more on my career. It had been a refuge in many ways, but now it felt like an area where I could truly excel, without any distractions or emotional baggage weighing me down. I threw myself into projects, meetings, and new opportunities. Slowly, I began to regain the confidence I had lost during the years of emotional turmoil. There was a sense of accomplishment, a reminder that there were things I was good at, things that didn't require anyone else's approval or validation. But even as I was growing stronger, I couldn't completely shake off the feeling of betrayal. There were still moments when I would see a couple laughing together in the street, or hear a song that reminded me of Erica, and my stomach would drop. It wasn't about missing her, it was about missing the version of myself that had existed with her. That man had been trusting, hopeful, and full of dreams about the future. But he was gone, replaced by someone who had been shattered, who had to pick up the pieces of his heart and start again. What hurt most was that I didn't even know who I could trust anymore. Erica had been my closest confidant, my partner, the person I turned to for everything. And now, she was the one who had broken that trust in the most painful way possible. How could I trust anyone else when the person I had trusted the most had shattered me so completely? But as I continued on this journey of healing, I began to realize something important. Trust was something that had to be rebuilt, not just from others, but from myself. I had to trust that I could handle whatever life threw my way, that I was strong enough to face the worst and come out on the other side. I had to trust that, even though Erica had betrayed me, I could still move forward. And that was the most important lesson of all. I didn't need her to validate me anymore. I didn't need anyone else to tell me that I was worthy or enough. I had to tell myself that, and I had to believe it. One afternoon, I met up with Ben again for a coffee. We were sitting at our usual spot, a small cafe that had become our go-to over the past few months. He was telling me about his latest dating adventures, joking about his awkward experiences, and I couldn't help but laugh. There was something so refreshing about being able to share these simple moments again. I think I'm starting to get it, I said, putting down my cup. I'm not in a rush to move on, and I'm okay with that. I'm starting to like where I am now. Ben smiled, clearly pleased to see the progress I had made. That's good, man. You're doing the right thing. You're putting yourself first, and that's all that matters. You've come a long way. And it was true. I had come a long way. I wasn't the same person I had been when Erica and I were together. That version of me, the one who was blindly loyal, who believed in the marriage despite all the signs, was gone. And in his place was a man who was learning to trust himself again, to find happiness in his own company, and to live life on his own terms. I had my moments of weakness, of course. There were days when the pain would rush back, when I would find myself missing the intimacy, the connection that Erica and I had shared. But those moments were fewer now. The hurt wasn't gone, but it was starting to feel more manageable. The anger was fading, and I was slowly starting to feel like myself again. I had learned to let go of the person I thought Erica was, and instead, I was learning to embrace the person I was becoming. I wasn't perfect, but I didn't need to be. I had survived the worst of it, and now it was time to embrace the future with open arms, whatever that future held. It had been nearly a year since I made the decision to walk away from Erica, and looking back, I knew it was the right choice. It hadn't been easy, and there were times when I doubted myself, but with every passing day, the weight of the past had become more manageable. The first few months had been a blur of pain and confusion, but now I was starting to feel like I had finally emerged from the wreckage of my old life. It felt like I was stepping into a new chapter, one where I was finally in control, finally in charge of my own story. Despite the progress I had made, there were still moments when the past would creep up on me. I would hear a song we used to listen to together, or see a couple holding hands, and for a brief moment, I would feel the sting of loss. But these moments didn't hold the same power they once did. They no longer had the ability to drag me back into the darkness. I had come to accept that the hurt would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me anymore. It was strange, in a way, how life had a way of moving forward regardless of what we were going through. I had spent so much time focused on the pain, on the betrayal, on the injustice of it all, but now I was beginning to realize that life didn't stop for anyone. Time didn't care about my heartbreak or my struggles. The world kept turning, and I had to decide whether I was going to keep spinning with it or get left behind. The decision, in the end, wasn't even about Erica. It was about me. It was about learning to love myself again, to trust myself again. I had spent so many years giving parts of myself away. So much of who I was had been consumed by the lies, the manipulations, the emotional roller coaster that had been my marriage. But now, I was reclaiming those parts of me. I was rediscovering who I was, and it felt like freedom. I started doing things for myself, without the need for validation from anyone else. I took up painting again, something I had loved as a child but had abandoned when life became too busy. I even took a solo trip to the mountains, spending a week alone, reflecting, reconnecting with nature, and rediscovering the peace that had eluded me for so long. There was a sense of pride in my independence, in the way I had learned to be content with just myself. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. In fact, I started to crave it. The solitude no longer felt like an emptiness I had to fill. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could think, heal, and grow. As I settled into this new phase of my life, I began to realize that I was no longer defined by my past. My relationship with Erica, as painful as it had been, was just one chapter in the larger story of my life. It didn't define me, and it didn't control me. In the months that followed, I started dating again. It wasn't something I had planned, but I met someone through a mutual friend. Her name was Claire. She was funny, kind, and had a quiet strength about her that drew me in. Our first few dates were simple, but they felt easy, natural. Claire didn't rush me, didn't push me to open up more than I was comfortable with. She respected my space, my boundaries, and in that, I found a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. I wasn't looking for a replacement for Erica, and I wasn't even sure I was ready for anything serious. But being with Claire reminded me that love could be simple, that it didn't have to be complicated or full of lies. She didn't make me feel small or insignificant, and she certainly didn't betray my trust. The thought of that kind of respect, that kind of connection, was a refreshing change. I was still cautious, of course. The scars left by Erica's betrayal didn't disappear overnight, and there were times when I struggled with the idea of letting someone else in. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of being hurt again, because I knew that I had the strength to handle it. I knew that I had already survived the worst, and anything else that came my way, I could face with the same resilience. In the quiet moments, when I sat alone and reflected on how far I had come, I felt a sense of pride in myself. I had healed, I had moved on, and I had found peace. I didn't need Erica or anyone else to complete me. I had learned to complete myself, to find my own worth, independent of anyone else's actions. As time went on, I realized that the pain from the past no longer held the same power over me. It wasn't gone, but it was something I had made peace with. It was a part of me, but it didn't define me. I had the power to choose how I wanted to move forward. And I chose to move forward with hope, with strength, and with the belief that the future still held something beautiful for me. Erica, in a strange way, had done me a favor. She had forced me to face my fears, my insecurities, and my deepest vulnerabilities. She had shattered my trust, yes, but in the process, she had forced me to rebuild it from the ground up. And in rebuilding my trust in myself, I had found a kind of freedom I had never known before. The road wasn't easy, and there were days when I wished I could go back and undo the hurt. But I knew that wasn't possible. What I could do, though, was keep moving forward. And I did. With each step, I felt stronger, more confident, and more ready for whatever the future might bring. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that the future was bright.